Carl Vesta stood on the broken bridge, glancing at the sea of stars through the cracked viewing window. The sky in the surrounding star field is always so deserted, like a forgotten painting. The sporadic stars radiate faint light, which makes people feel that they can't do anything. His ship, Grey Flag, was once the most exquisite thrust in the Silver Empire. Now it is like a dying old man, with scars left by the battle. The engine constantly produces tiny scare thorns, as if it will fall apart at any time. Commander, in front is the edge of the castle star cloud. The signal interference is very strong, and Radha is almost lost. Adjutant Heron's voice came from the communication device, carrying a burst of fatigue. He was one of Carl's few old subordinates, with a so-called expression on his face, but his eyes could not hide his tiredness about this ghost place. Continue to move forward and walk through the core of Star Cloud. Carl's voice was low and calm, as if he had been roaming like this kind of wandering for a long time. He turned around and the light in the bridge was dim, only a few control panels were barely lit, reflecting the deep scars on his face. That was left during the internal war in the Empire 3 years ago. At that time, he thought he could hold the last line of defense, but was stabbed from behind by his own people. Exile was the last mercy of the Empire to him. Once, he was the youngest commander of the Silver River Empire, in charge of hundreds of star ships, and his name was like thunder among the stars. But now, he didn't even have a ship like that, carrying several soldiers, and survived in this birdless star field, avoiding the pursuit of military officers and the cold eyes of his former colleagues. Commander, do you really want to enter the castle Star Cloud? I heard something strange here, and I didn't even dare to get close to the smugglers. Heron slapped his head and tried to make a picture of a peaceful atmosphere, but Carr just glanced at him coldly. If we don't go in, we will have to die in this empty starry sea. Carl's temperament is unquestionable. He held a broken data board in his hand, showing a blurry message from an unknown source, mentioning that there might be a fragment of Imperial objects hidden deep in the castle Star Cloud. This kind of thing became a scent after the collapse of the Empire, saying that it could unlock the lost technology and even awaken the sleeping star giant. Carl doesn't believe these ghosts, but he doesn't have any choice. If you can find this thing, change the resources and at least let the gray number be swept for several more months. The ship rushed into the edge of the star cloud, and the purple-red gas clouds surrounded them like huge curtains. The screen of Leda is filled with messes, and occasionally a few unknown signals flashed by, like the ghost Prajna is hidden. Carr's eyebrows were tightly locked, and he didn't like this feeling. It seemed like he was being targeted by something. All members enter the battle preparations, and the weapon system is on standby. He gave the order, and there was a slight gusto in his voice. Several crew members in the bridge immediately became busy. Although they were not in sufficient staff, they had fought tough battles with Carr, and their actions were quite quick. At this moment, a sudden harsh noise came from the communication device, followed by a strange sound, low and sandy. The gray number is the red flame of the International Army Group. We checked your signal. Stop the ship immediately and accept the inspection, otherwise we will see you as the enemy target. Carl's face darkened. Is it that the army? It is not a good thing to encounter a soldier in this ghost place. He pressed the response key of the communication device. His language was calm and quiet as if he was chatting about home. Red flame? I haven't heard it. The border star field is not your ground plate. Why did you stop me from the boat? The other party's voice sneered. Carl Vista, don't put on garlic. Your name is familiar in the Star Sea. We have been eating the money we have for several years. If you know, hand over what you have in your hands, maybe we can save you a lifetime. Carl's fingers tightened slightly, and he made a fortune? He knew he was a target for movement, but he didn't expect that even such remote places would recognize him. He glanced at Harlem and said in a low voice, prepare to jump into the engine and throw them off. Commander, the engine status is unstable, and the forced jump may explode. Heron was so anxious that he was sweating, but Carl just said coldly, then just take a snatch, it's better than being slaughtered by these soldiers. Just as the gray engine began to preheat, several high-speed moving lights suddenly appeared on the raid, rushing them toward them. the other party obviously didn't plan to stop and just started to fire. Several energy beams broke through the star clouds, rubbed the gray ship over, and the bridge was shocked violently, and the police sound was so harsh that it made people feel hurt. Counterattack. The side wing turret locks the target. Carl roared. Although the gray number was broken, its firepower was still too good. Several old-fashioned energy cannons emitted low birds, and they also hit the enemy, and a group of fire burst out in Xingyun. The battle was extremely fierce. Although the other party didn't have many ships, they cooperated with each other and seemed to have been ambushed a long time ago. Carl bit his teeth and flew in his brain to calculate the route of his body. He knew that dragging it would be bad for them, and the Grey Guard would not last long. At this moment, another sound came from the communication device. This time it was a woman's voice, cold and decisive. "The red flames are rolling out this star field, otherwise don't blame me for being rude." Carl was stunned for a moment. The sound did not sound like the one on the side of the soldier, nor was it his person. He had not come to react at any time, and suddenly there were a few more signals on the Rayad, approaching at high speed from Xingyun Deep, with full firepower, and directly attacking the Red Flame ship. The battle scene suddenly became a group, and the Red Flame soldiers obviously did not expect a third party to intervene, and their shape was beaten to pieces. "Commander, whose man is this?" Erin's eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. Carl slammed his head, and there was a little more alert in his eyes. "I don't know, but I'm sure I'm not here to help us. Let's leave and don't worry about them." The gray-burning number barely adjusts its posture, and the engine produces a harsh thorn, rushing towards the depths of the star cloud. The battle sound behind him gradually faded away, but Carl's face did not relax. He knew that the trouble hidden in this star cloud was probably more than he thought. About half an hour later, the gray number finally departed from the battle range and docked next to a relatively stable asteroid belt. The ship's damage report shows that their protective covers are almost wiped out, and there are several cracks on the port side, which are hard to repair at a time. Carl leaned against the chair of the bridge, lit a cheap electronic smoke, spit out a white fog, and looked at the darkness outside the window with empty eyes. "Commander, who is that helping?" And the voice of that woman doesn't sound like a soldier. Erin rubbed the dust on the console and couldn't help asking. "No matter who he is, there are so many guys in Shanghai who want to break up." Carl snatched the electronic smoke and stood up. "Go and check off the ship, don't let us fall apart in this broken place." At this moment, the communication suddenly started to sound again, and this time it was the voice of the woman. "Carl Vesta, I know you are listening. I am Erin Solanis, and the Red Flame Army almost killed you. I saved you once, and now we have to talk." Carl raised his eyebrows. He had never heard of this name, but there was a sense of dignity in his language that could not be ignored. He pressed the reply key and spoke with a silk thread. "Erin Solanis? I have remembered the life-saving grace, but are you looking for me to have fun? This place is not a good place for chatting." There was a smile in the other party's voice. "I look for you because we have a common goal. The things in Kassar Star Cloud are not only you want, but I also need them. Cooperation will have benefits for us." Carl was silent for a few seconds, and the power of flying in his brain weighed the pros and cons. He doesn't like dealing with strangers, especially in such a ghost place, but the other party's strength is obviously not weak, and she seems to know a lot of inside stories. He said in a low voice, "Okay, say the place, meet and talk." "Very good, I'll send you a seat tag. Don't play with it, Carl, I'm not the helping waste." Erin's voice broke, and there was only silence left in the communication device. Carl looked at the coordinates jumping out of the screen, his eyes gradually becoming deeper. He didn't know what this Erin Solanis was, but he just told him that this meeting might change a lot. He turned to Erin. "Prepare the boat, let's see this life savior." The gray number is slammed and drove towards the coordinates. The purple-red gas of Xingyun flowed out of the window, like a soundless dream. Carl stood in the middle of the bridge, his fingers knocking on the console, and his brain repeatedly pondered a question: how many secrets does this woman know about the imperial things? After a few hours, the gray number arrived at the designated location, a wasteland mining asteroid with pits on the surface, like it had been washed by a war fire countless times. Radar shows a medium-sized ship nearby, designed in a style that is not like a military valve or an old ship of the Empire. There is a red flame magazine on the piece, which should be Erin Solanis' ship. Carr took how long and several men to approach the surface of the asteroid in an old landing boat. The air was thin and the surface was covered with dust. They wore simple protective clothing and walked heavily towards the designated meeting point of the other party, a deserted mine entrance. Before he got closer, Carl saw a figure standing at the entrance, tall, wearing an erect battle dress, his helmet covering most of his face, but it could be seen from his figure that it was a woman. Behind her were several soldiers in full arms, and the weapons in her hands were obviously not cheap. "Carl Vesta, I never thought you would really dare to come." Erin's voice was sent out from her helmet, with a touch of fun. She took off her helmet and showed a cold face, with a sharp light flashing in her eyes, as if she could see through people's thoughts. Carl stopped and looked her up and down. His words were plain, "Erin Solanis, it looks like you are not like an ordinary soldier. Tell me, what did you find me?" Erin smiled, walked up to him, and said in a low voice, "I look for you because we are all looking for the same thing, the fragment of the Empire. I know you have a wire in your hand, and I have the resources and people. Carl, it won't take long to fight you, and cooperate with me, and we can turn this starry sea upside down." Carl's eyes flashed, and he didn't expect her to be so straightforward. He was silent for a moment, then sneered, "Cooperation? It sounds good, but what do you believe in you? I have seen the betrayal in Shanghai for a lot." Erin's smile remained unchanged. She took out a small piece of metal from her waist, with ancient imperial runes engraved on it, emitting a faint blue light. Carr's pupils shrank, and he thought it was something, the core component of the Empire object, exactly the same as what was mentioned on the data board in his hand. "This is my sincerity." Erin threw the fragments to him, his language full of confidence. "Carl, the truth about the collapse of the Empire is far more complicated than you think. Looking for these fragments with me, we may be able to reveal everything." Carl picked up the fragments and his fingers shook slightly. He knew that this thing was not simple, and the woman in front of him was definitely not an ordinary soldier. He raised his head, with a little more determination in his eyes. "Okay, cooperate. But I have a condition: if there is danger, my people will evacuate first." "Trade." Erin clicked a little, turned around and walked towards the depths of the mine. "Come with me, the secret of Castle Star Cloud is more than this piece of fragment." Carl followed her, his feet calm, but his mind was filled with countless thoughts. The collapse of the Empire, the truth of betrayal, and the secret of this deep sea of stars. He knew that he had embarked on a path of no end. And all of this just began. Carl followed Erin and stepped on the gravel at the entrance of the mine, making a shattering sound. The air in the scrap mining area was thin, and a thin layer of fog was constantly condensed from the mask of the protective clothing, making the scene in front of you a little blurred. The passages of the mine are very narrow, and the walls on both sides are filled with traces left by excavation. Occasionally, some old mechanical slaughter can be seen, as if they have been abandoned for 10 years. The lighting lamp on the top was already damaged, and only the light source in Erin's hand emitted a faint white light, barely illuminating the way forward. This place used to be a rare mine in the Empire. Later, the internal war broke out and the mine was abandoned. Erin's voice came from the communication channel, and the language was calm and quiet as if he was telling a story. However, there were some things that the Empire had not taken away, including the ropes of the fragments of the objects. Carl glanced at her, holding the metal pieces she had just smeared him in his hand, and the blue light seemed to be hidden in the darkness. He asked in a low voice, "How do you know so much? It doesn't look like a soldier who just rushes to this." Erin didn't look back, but just smiled lightly. "Carl, everyone in Shanghai has some secrets. You have yours, I have mine. Want to know more? Then let's go out of here alive." Carl didn't ask any more. Although he was full of doubt, it was not the time to tear his face. He turned around and looked at Erin and several of his men behind him. They all held their weapons tightly, with alertness in their eyes. The atmosphere in the mine was so strange, as if something would come out of the darkness at any time. After walking for about 10 minutes, the passage gradually became wider, and a huge underground cavity appeared in front of it, like a naturally formed cave. There's an old control tower in the center of the cave, full of rocks, and some abandoned mines and mechanical arms are scattered around it. Erin stopped and pointed to the direction of the control tower. Based on my information, the fragmented wire is there. However, there may be a defense system here, so don't be careless. Defense system? Erin couldn't help but interrupt. His voice was dissatisfied. Did you know there was a danger here, so would we follow us? Erin turned over and glanced at him coldly. There is no danger in the Star Sea. You Commander didn't even say anything. What are you anxious about? Erin was choked and said nothing. Carl patted his shoulder and said in a low voice, "Don't waste, prepare your weapons and keep alert." He turned to Erin, speaking calmly, "You lead the way, let's follow." Erin clicked a little and took several of her soldiers to the control tower first. Afterwards, Carl and his group stumbled back in the empty cave, which was particularly harsh. The closer you get to the control tower, the more you feel an indescribable sense of pressure in the air, like an invisible gaze watching them in the dark. As soon as I walked to the control tower, a light vibration suddenly came from the ground, followed by a low mechanical start sound. Car's pupils shrank and he immediately shouted, "Scatter!" Something. As soon as the voice fell, several gaps broke open on the ground around the control tower, and several old anti-human machines rose from it. The machine was covered in dust, but the red light of the weapon system was dazzling. Can the old goods from the Empire still move? Irene was shocked in her voice, but she reacted very quickly pulled out the energy gun from her waist and opened fire to the nearest unmanned machine. The blue energy beam hit the shell of the unmanned machine, and a spark burst out, but the other party just shook it, and immediately adjusted the muzzle and hit it. "Find a cover. Don't resist," Carl ordered, pulling Erin and hiding behind a wasteland mine. Although the firepower of the unmanned aircraft was not as good as that of that year, it was quite large. The energy beams shot around the cave, and when they hit the wall, they exploded large pieces of gravel, and the surface of the field instantly formed a group. Carl poked his head out and quickly swept the battlefield. Erin and her soldiers cooperated tacitly, retreated and fought, trying to attract unmanned attention. He gritted his teeth and said to Erin in a low voice, "We wings over from the side, turn off the control tower's mainframe, and these things should stop." "Commander, is this too risky, right?" Erin was filled with his face, but Carl just glanced at him coldly. "If you don't want to die, just listen to me, move." The two of them took advantage of the Inhuman being attracted by Erin and quickly rolled out from behind the mine and rushed towards the side of the control tower. On the way, an unmanned aircraft discovered them, and the muzzle was regulating, and the energy beam brushed against Car's shoulders, and the outer layer of the protective suit was burnt. He bit his teeth tightly, turned over and hid in a pile of mechanical slaughter, and lifted up a scrap metal rod with his hand and threw it hard towards the unmanned machine. The metal rod hit the sensor of the unmanned camera and made a sound of crispness. The opponent lost control in a short time and shot in a muzzle, giving Car and Erin the opportunity to rush into the side. The inside of the control tower is even more messy, with broken circuit boards on the floor, and the air is filled with burnt smell. Carl quickly found the main console, and although the screen was full of cracks, it could barely show some data. He is not a technical expert, but he learned some basic operations when he was in the survey team that year. He quickly tapped the keyboard and tried to close the defense system. "Commander, you can't hold it outside anymore. Hurry up." Haroon guarded the door and opened a few guns outside, his voice full of anxiety. Carl did not reply, and worked carefully, and finally found an option that looked like a closing command. He pressed the confirmation key without hesitation, and the screen flashed for a moment. Then the mechanical sound in the cave stopped gradually. The red light of the unmanned machine went out, and the walls fell to the ground. "It's done." Carl relaxed his breath, wiped the sweat from his head, and turned around and walked out of the control tower. Erin also stopped attacking. 2 of her soldiers were injured, but they were still intact. She walked up to Carl, with a little praise in her eyes. "No, Carl, I didn't expect you to do this." "Stop talking, where's the thread?" Carl was in a state of greeting and directly entered the main topic. Erin snatched her shoulders and pointed to a broken stash that controlled the top of the tower. "There should be a data core, with fragments falling inside it." The 2 of them climbed up to the top of the control tower with several subordinates. The locks of the cassettes had long been damaged and were easily pried open. There is indeed an old-fashioned data core inside, with a dusty surface, but the connection port is still intact. Carl connected his own endpoint, and a string of encrypted data popped up on the screen, and there were a few blurry star pictures. "There is a place that is marked as a forbidden area deep in Kasardot." Erin looked over and took a look, with a burst of excitement in her language. "The fragments should be there. However, data mentions that there are abnormal energy fluctuations in that place, which may be dangerous." "Abnormal energy fluctuation?" Carl sniffed at the brow. He didn't like this kind of indeterminate thing, but there was no way out now. He downloaded the data to his end and turned to Erin. "Then go and see. Can your ship keep up with the speed of the gray number?" Erin smiled and said, "Don't worry, my red flame is not a broken copper wire. Let's go, Carl, don't let me down." After a few hours, the 2 ships left the asteroid and advanced towards the depths of the Castle Star Cloud. The air cloud group of Xingyun is becoming more and more dense, and the interference on the thunder is becoming stronger and stronger. The atmosphere in the Greyburn Bridge is so stressful that it makes people breathless. Carl stood in front of the viewing window, staring at the purple-red fog outside the window, and repeatedly pondered the abnormal energy fluctuations mentioned in the data. He had a bad premonition that this action might be more trickier than he thought. "Commander, Red Flame is sending a message. They said there are unknown signals in front of them, so it is recommended to slow down." Erin's voice interrupted his thoughts. Carl clicked the head and said in a low voice, "Tell them, let's keep up. The weapon system is on standby, don't be careless." The ship continued to move forward, and not long after, a huge signal source appeared on the thunder, like a certain energy field, and the scope was staggering. Carl's eyebrows are tightly locked, and this kind of energy field is definitely not formed naturally. At this moment, Erin's voice was transmitted from the communication device, and there was a tight slight in her language. "Carl, did you see that thing? This is not an ordinary star cloud interference, like some kind of artificial barrier." "Artificial barrier?" Carl's brain flashed with a head. The Empire did have similar technologies that year to protect core facilities. He replied in a low voice, "It may be the residency of the Empire. Look closer, but don't be tempted." The 2 ships approached the energy field. As the distance was shortened, some blurry silhouettes began to appear outside the window, a huge ring-shaped structure floating deep in the star clouds, with weak arcs surrounding them, like some ancient space station. Carr's pupils slightly retracted, and he could see that this was the Star Ring outpost of the Empire, a military facility used to guard the Forbidden Area. "This place is not simple." Erin's voice came from the communications, carrying a solemn look. "The data shows that the debris are inside the outpost. But the energy field will interfere with the ship system, and going directly may be risky." Carl was silent for a few seconds, and the power of flying in his brain weighed the pros and cons. The defense system of the Starring outpost is not comparable to those old and unparalleled in the mines. Once touched, they may not have the chance to escape. But the fragments were right in front of him, and he couldn't give up. He said in a low voice, "Get close with a landing boat and leave the boat outside and stand by. If there is any problem, evacuate immediately." "Agree." Erin's response was very simple. Then the 2 ships each released a landing boat and drove towards the Star Ring outpost. Carr brought Erin and several subordinates, Erin brought her core team members, and the 2 teams met outside the outpost. The outer shell of the outpost is full of traces left by the battle, as if it had been under numerous attacks, but the structure is still complete. Carl found a broken air gate and opened the entrance with a stool cutter. The air inside has long been leaking out, the environment is as bad as the mine, but the internal facilities are better preserved than expected, and the Imperial map on the wall is still visible. The signal of the fragment is in the heart of the outpost. Erin looked at the detector in her hand and said in a low voice. However, the energy fluctuations here are getting stronger and stronger, maybe some kind of protection mechanism. We need to be quicker. Carl clicked the head and led his team along the corridor. The inside of the outpost looks like a maze, with all passages connected to each other, and occasionally you can hear a low mechanical sound, like something is moving. They walked for a while, the detector suddenly issued a sharp warning, and the ground shook for a while, and the corridor was as red as it shone. No, it's an automatic defense system. Erin gritted her teeth and quickly pulled out her weapon. Carl immediately ordered the scattering, but it was too late. Hidden turrets on both sides of the corridor started, and energy beams shot towards them. A soldier in the team failed to react. When the scene was hit, his protective suit broke instantly and he fell to the ground and he was no longer calm. Find a cover. Still hit. Carl roared, hid behind a raised metal plate, took out his energy and shot at the fort. Erin was not to be outdone. Her soldiers were powerful and several precise shots destroyed a turret, but the opponent had too many numbers and the surface was still glued. If this continues, you have to turn off the main control. Carl bit his teeth and looked around and found that there was an emergency passage leading to the upper level at all times, which should be able to reach the control room directly. He turned his head and shouted to Erin, "I'll go and contact the system, you cover it up." "Don't be strong, Carl." Erin looked back at him, with a flash of hesitation in her eyes, but she still pointed, "Go, and go back quickly, we won't be able to hold it long." Carr carried Halen into the emergency passage, and the energy beam exploded behind him, causing heat to sweep. They ran all the way and finally arrived at the control room, full of old equipment, but the main console was still moving, and the screen showed the status of the defense system. "Don't die." Carl punched the console, and flew quickly in his brain to recall the operation rules of the Empire that year. Suddenly, he flashed his spirit and entered a set of old-fashioned emergency shutdown instructions. This was the preparatory plan he learned when he was still the commander. After the screen flashed for a few times, the state of the defense system finally changed to offline. "It's done." Erin relaxed his voice, but Carl's face was still solemn. He knew that this kind of outpost could not have only one layer of defense, and the real trouble might be behind. He pressed the communication device and said to Erin, "The system is turned off. After we get along, we continue to walk to the core." After a few minutes, the two teams met in the control room. Although they were a little bit bad, they never lost any manpower. Erin glanced at Carl, with a mess in her language. "You are indeed not an ordinary exile, Carl. Not everyone can know the Empire's authorization code." Carl ignored her trial and said coldly, "Don't waste your time, the fragments have not been obtained yet, don't relax." They continued to move towards the core area and did not encounter a defense system on the way, but the energy fluctuations became stronger and stronger, and even the guard screens began to fail. Finally, they arrived at a huge circular hall, with a luminous container floating in the center of the hall, with a piece of metal fragments, exactly like the one in Carr's hand, emitting a strong blue light. "That's it." Erin's voice was filled with excitement, but Carr raised his eyebrows. "There is an energy barrier around the container. It is displayed on the control panel next to it that this thing is connected to the main energy core of the outpost, and the forced removal may cause an explosion." "This is a trap," Carr said softly, turning his head toward Erin. "The Empire wouldn't leave the thing so simply. What's your way?" Erin was silent for a few seconds, then took out a small crystal from her backpack. The surface of the crystal was engraved with Imperial runes, similar to the pattern on the fragments. She said in a low voice, "This is to unlock the keys and close the barrier at a time. But there is only one chance, and if it fails, the entire outpost may explode." Carl's eyes flashed, and he didn't expect Erin to have such things in his hand. He clicked his head and said with a determined aphrodisiac, "Then try it. I'll cover you up and start." Erin walked to the control panel, inserted the crystal into the interface, and a string of data popped up on the screen, and the light of the barrier began to weaken. At this moment, the ground suddenly shook violently, and a red warning light lit up on the wall of the building. A mechanical sound sounded, "Warning, unauthorized operation, the outpost self-destruction program is started, and it is expected to detonate in 60 seconds. Don't die." Carl bit his teeth and pulled it to the container. While the barrier had completely disappeared, he reached out to grab the debris. The blue light made his eyes hurt, but he couldn't take advantage of these. He turned around and shouted, "Run! Don't worry about the others." Everyone ran towards the exit, and the vibration behind them became stronger and stronger. The wall began to collapse, and the debris scattered all over the ground. Carl bit his teeth tightly, holding the fragments tightly in his hand, and only one thought in his brain: go out alive. They finally rushed out of the gate, and the boarding boat was nowhere to go, but the outpost explosion was close to it. "Go on the boat." Erin's voice was almost drowned by the explosion. Carl finally jumped onto the landing boat. As soon as the boat door closed, a huge shock wave drove them flying. The landing boat rolled over in Xinyan for a few times, and finally calmed down. Through the window, you could see the outpost turning into a huge group of fireballs, which was later swallowed by Xinyan's gas. Carl leaned against the boat wall, gasping heavily, and the debris in his hands were still emitting a glimmer of light. He turned to Erin and said in a low voice, "We got it, but the price for this thing is quite high. You'd better tell me if this thing is worth it." Erin smiled, a complex light flashing in her eyes. "Carl, believe me, this is just the beginning. The secret of the fragments is far bigger than you think. We have to find a safe place, study this, and decide on the next step." Carl didn't say anything, just clicked the head silently. The boats drove towards the grayscale, and the purple-red gas of Xinyan flowed out the window, like a soundless prediction. He knew that this journey had just begun, and the greater storm had been curled in the depths of the starry sea. Carl leaned on the seat of the boarding boat, holding the fragments of the Imperial space radiating faint blue light in his hand. His eyes passed through the window, and glancing at the flames that disappeared from the depths of the star clouds of Kazal. The explosion of the stone wave was still coming back in the brain, and the outpost's skeleton had been swallowed by the purple-red gas, as if it had never existed. He took a deep breath, and the air inside the protective server smelled a little bit of metal, which made his thoughts a little clearer. "Commander, we are safe. The gray and red flags are on standby and ready to respond." Erin's voice came from the communication channel, bringing a relaxation after a disaster, but Carl just whined lightly, without saying much. He turned to look at Erin Solanis sitting opposite her. She was looking down at the equipment in her hand. There was no expression on her face, but there was a thoughtful light in her eyes. "Is this really worth our life just now?" Carl finally opened his mouth, his voice low, and he was exhausted. He lifted up pieces, and the blue light reflected on his face, looking a little cold. Erin raised his head and glanced at him, with a meaningful smile on his lips. "Carl, everything in the Star Sea has its price. This piece is not just an old antique, it is the key to the core secret of the Empire. This piece in your hand, and the piece I gave you before, can unlock more things, maybe more dangerous than you think, or more important than you think." Carl's eyebrows were snaking, without saying a word, just looking down at the ancient runes on the fragments. He thought some of these runes were special languages used by the Empire's high level to encrypt information, but he could not understand the specific meaning. He knew Erin didn't say the whole story. This woman had many secrets from the beginning, but now they were on a boat, and tearing her face would not be good for anyone. "Go back to the ship first," he finally said, his temperament as calm as the next ordinary order. "Find a safe place and study it thoroughly before talking about it. The trouble in Xinyan is still not over, and I don't want to be ambushed by whom again." Erin clicked a little, but did not object. The landing boat quickly met the gray number, and Carr took his men back to the familiar bridge. Although the place was still broken, at least it was his own ground, which made him feel a little relieved. The red flame number followed the two ships rushed towards Xinyan together, intending to find a remote star field to fall into the foot first. After a few hours, they finally left the area of Cassar star clouds interference and docked next to a non-conversant asteroid belt. The gray engine released the last sound of exhausted birds and stopped. The atmosphere in the bridge was not so stressful. Carl sat on the finger chair, with 2 pieces of object fragments placed on the table in front of him, and the blue lights reflected each other, like some kind of strange dance. Erin arrived at the gray number by short-range transmission, carrying a casual decoder and several of her technicians. As soon as she entered the bridge, she headed straight to the topic. My team has initially analyzed the data of the first fragment, and combined with this new one, it should be able to unravel some encrypted information. However, the energy fluctuation of this thing is strange, as if it is connected to some larger system. Big system? Carl leaned against the back of the chair, crossing his hands, and a look of alertness in his eyes. Are you saying, what might this thing be communicating with? It's possible. Erin pointed out, signaling her technician to start operating the decoder. The technology of the Empire back then was far beyond our imagination. These objects were not just the loads of information storage, but perhaps some kind of control device. I heard that before the Empire collapsed, it started a project called the Star Core Plan and planned to use these objects to wake up the sleeping star giants as their final weapons. When Carl heard the word star giant, and his eyebrows jumped. Of course he had heard this saying that the Star Sea was full of stories about the secret weapons of the Empire, but most people only thought it was nonsense in the winery. But now, Erin's language doesn't mean a joke, which makes him feel a little more uneasy. If this thing really awakens something giant, then isn't we just a moving target when we hold it? Erin couldn't help but interrupt, and his face was filled with grief. Commander, why don't we sell it, change resources, and don't get into this trouble? Carl glanced at him without saying anything, but the coldness in his eyes made Erin immediately shut his mouth. He turned to Erin and asked in a low voice, "What do you think? Keep researching, or find a place to hide it?" Erin smiled, with a flash of tick in her eyes. "Carl, you're not the one who's going to die halfway. Neither am I. Since we got this, we have to figure out the bottom of it. The truth about the collapse of the Empire may be hidden in these fragments. Don't you want to know who betrayed you that year and changed you from the commander of the fleet to this current model?" This hit Carl's pain, his face darkened, and his fingers were unconsciously tightened. He was silent for a few seconds, and finally said, "Okay, continue. But if there is danger, I won't let my people die in vain." "Don't worry, I won't either." A string of data popped up on the decoder's screen, and the atmosphere in the bridge became unusually calm, with only the low sound of equipment moving back. Carl stood up, walked to the viewing window, staring at the deserted sea of stars outside the window, and recalled repeatedly in his brain, from the glory of the Empire to the betrayal of the internal war, into the current wandering. He thought he had been numb for a long time, but Irene's words still made a flame ignite in his heart. He wanted to know the truth, and to know who stabbed him in the back that year. "Commander, the code has been decoded." Erin's voice interrupted his thoughts. Carl turned around and saw a blurry star on the screen marked with several unknown coordinates. One of them had a red warning tag next to it, which was marked as Tau Core Zone. "Where is this?" Carl walked to the screen and asked with his eyebrows. Erin came over and looked at it, and her face became solemn. "This is a forbidden area deep in the Starry Sea. It was listed as the absolute forbidden zone during the Empire. It said that it was the most core experiment site of the Empire, hiding their most dangerous secrets. The energy fluctuations of the fragments, which have a strong coordination with this coordinate, may be the final storage place for objects." "The final place to store?" Carr's voice was low, with a slight suspicion. "Are you saying that we are only part of the fragments in our hands, and where is the real thing?" "It's very likely." Erin pointed a little, with a flash of excitement in her eyes. "Carl, this is an opportunity. If we can get all the things, maybe reveal the truth about the collapse of the Empire, or even, rebuild something." Carl didn't say anything, just looked silently at the red mark on the star. He knew that this so-called Tag Core area was definitely not a good place. the Empire did not allow its own team to approach that year, indicating that the level of danger there was beyond imagination. But at the same time, there was a rush in his heart, which made him want to find out not only for the truth, but also for the deceased companions and the glory of the past. "Prepare the boat, let's go and have a look." He finally opened his mouth, his verbal spirits as if he was on the next irresistible order. "But if you don't take it this time, send a detector to go over and find out the situation before talking." Erin clicked a little, obviously not surprised by his decision. The two ships quickly adjusted their course and drove towards the seats on the star map. The desolate scene brought by the asteroid gradually fades away, and the sea of stars becomes deeper, like a purity without any edge, making it impossible to see through. A few days later, they reached the edge of the taboo core. The starry sky here is extremely dark, and the light of the stars is swallowed by some invisible force. The thunder is filled with information, as if it has entered a certain energy dead zone. Carr stood on the bridge, looking ahead through the viewing window, and could see a huge shadow, like some artificial structure, floating in the darkness, with faint arcs surrounding him. What is this?" Erin couldn't help but mutter in a low voice, a shaking sound. Carl didn't say anything, but a chill broke out in his heart. The scale of this structure is far larger than any known space station, and it is even larger than the core fleet base of the Empire that year, like some sleeping giant, quietly waiting to be awakened. The detector returns the data. Erin's voice came from the communication, carrying a tight end. "There is a strong energy barrier here, and if you go directly, you will be torn apart. But there is a life signal, and a certain abnormal wave, which is consistent with the energy frequency of the debris." "Life signal?" Carr's eyebrows snaked, and a bad thought flashed in his brain. "Are you saying, are there anyone here? Or something else?" Erin's vocals were a bit more serious. "Carl, this place is not simple. We have to find a way to pass through the barrier, but the ship rushed directly over to death. I suggest using a small shuttle, a jam device, and trying to break through a small barrier." Carl was silent for a few seconds, and the power of flying in his brain weighed the pros and cons. This is an adventure plan, but if they don't try, they will never know what is hidden behind the barrier. He finally pointed. "Okay, get ready for the shuttle. I'll go by yourself, you're on standby outside." "Commander, this is too dangerous." Erin immediately objected, but Carl just glanced at him coldly. "I said, I'll go. Get ready for equipment, don't waste it." Erin didn't object, but just said in a low voice, "I'll go with you. Unlocking the fragments requires my key crystal. If I don't have me, you can't get in." A few hours later, a small shuttle was launched from the gray number, carrying Carl, Erin, and a few carefully selected technicians, heading towards the energy barrier. As the shuttle approached the barrier, the arc outside the window became more dense, like countless razors dancing in the dark. Carl held the slug tightly, his face was cold, and his brain repeatedly counted the route. Erin sat in the deputy, responsible for monitoring the state of the interference device, and a tight sound was brought to the sound. "The barrier energy begins to drop, and you are ready to break through. 3, 2, 1, impulse." The shuttle accelerated suddenly, and the moment it penetrated into the barrier, the entire machine body shook violently, as if it was torn to pieces by invisible force. The alarm sounded so harshly that it hurt people's head. Carl bit his teeth tightly, calmed down, and finally rushed in when the barrier teared open a small opening. The arc behind him quickly closed, as if it had never been opened. "We're in." Erin relaxed, but Carr's face still didn't relax. He looked out the window, and the scene inside the barrier made his pupils shrink, a huge circular structure with a core radiating green light floating in the center, like a source of energy, and countless fragments floating around, as if they were being led to a slow rotation by some force. "Is this the star core of the Empire?" Irene's voice was shocked. "The ultimate weapon in the history controls the center?" Carl didn't say anything, but he had an answer in his mind. This place was definitely the most core secret facility of the Empire that year, and it may be the core of the star nuclear plan. He urged the shuttle to approach the central core, and the fragments of the object in his hand began to vibrate violently, and the blue light became dazzling, as if he was awakened by some kind of force. "Be careful, the energy waves are increasing," Erin shouted suddenly, and then a series of warnings popped up on the shuttle's screen, and the fragments around the core suddenly accelerated and rotated, as if a small stone was formed. Carl quickly adjusted the direction, but was still one step late. An invisible shock wave lifted the shuttle, and the machine body flipped in the air for a few circles, and finally calmed down. "Don't die, this thing is on defense." Carl bit his teeth and tried to get closer, but the energy field around the core became stronger and stronger, as if he was rejecting any outsiders. He turned his head and looked at Erin and asked in a low voice, "Can your key crystal work?" Erin clicked the head and quickly connected the crystal to the shuttle's control system. A series of data popped up on the screen, and the core energy field began to slowly and weaken. At this moment, a low voice suddenly echoed in the communication channel, as if it was transmitted from the deep penis. "Warning, unauthorized access, the satellite core system activates the defense mode." "What kind of ghost thing is this?" Carl's face changed, and before he could react, several beams of light suddenly rose from the core and shot straight towards the shuttle. He quickly pulled the rod and hurriedly avoided it, but the second beam of light hit the machine, and the protection layer was instantly burned. "We have to withdraw." Erin gritted her teeth, but Carl slammed her head, and there was a lot of determination in her eyes. "No, I've come all here. I won't leave if I haven't got anything. You cover me up, I'll go to the core." "You're crazy." Erin's eyes widened, but Carl ignored her and directly pushed the shuttle towards the core. The beam exploded behind him, and the machine body vibrated violently. He gritted his teeth and finally approached the core, using the fragments in his hand to the core interface. The blue light intersected with the green light, like some ancient stance. The core energy field suddenly disappeared completely, and the surrounding fragments also stopped rotating. "It's done." Erin's voice was filled with disbelief, but Carl's face became even more solemn. He looked at the core, and a huge shadow appeared in the green light, like the silhouette of a creature, scattering a sideless sense of pressure. "Is this the star giant?" Carl muttered in a low voice, a chill in his heart. He suddenly realized that the Empire's tradition might not be groundless, that it was really some kind of sleeping weapon, and they might have just woken up it. "Carl, we have to leave, now." Erin's voice almost roared. The shuttle's alarm had already been resonated, and the space around the core began to twist, as if it was about to collapse. Carl bit his teeth and quickly activates the shuttle to evacuate, pushing towards the exit of the barrier. "The green light behind me is getting stronger and stronger, as if something is awakening." They finally pushed out of the barrier and returned to the standby area of gray and red numbers, but Carl's face still didn't relax. He looked out the window, and the green light inside the barrier began to spread out, like some kind of unstoppable force. He knew that they might have really stabbed a big pair this time. "Commander," a large number of unknown signals appeared on Rida, coming from the direction of the prohibited area. Erin's voice came from the communication device, causing a panic. Carl turned to look at the screen and saw countless light spots approaching, like some kind of fleet, but the signal frequency did not belong to any known force at all. "Prepare for a fight," he ordered, his voice low and determined. He knew that this battle might have just begun, and the fate of Shanghai might no longer be in their hands.